welcome to Question Time. Welcome to you at home, welcome to our audience here who are going to be asking the questions and, of course, arguing with our panel. Our panel, the Liberal Democrat Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander, Labour's Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Rachel Reeves, the Conservative David Davis, who lost out to David Cameron for the leadership of the Tory party, the LBC radio presenter, Nick Ferrari, and Professor of Classics at Cambridge University, Mary Beard. Thank you very much. We'll take our first question from Thomas Rouse, please. Thomas Rouse.
In light of the PISA International Student Assessment Survey published this week, is it time to send our children to school in South Korea? In South Africa, you're going to say, in South Korea.
South Korea. This was, of course, the view that the UK was way, way behind 20 or so other countries. Mary Beard, should we go to South Korea?
Well, I happen to have an ex-student who's currently teaching in a school in South Korea, and she emailed me a couple of days ago and said, "You don't know how difficult it is teaching a class of children who've always been taught that to ask a question was a weakness." Everything we see about the politicians being mesmerised by these PISA tables seems to me to be completely bonkers. And clearly you can learn some things. You can learn some things about micro differences between countries in the UK, for example. But if you actually imagine that Shanghai was a dream ticket for kids' education because they are doing well at these tests to which they have been very adequately taught, you would be mad. And I think that there's two problems here. I think one is there is no right way of educating kids. And if we could all realise that there wasn't a right answer, there are some ways we can do better than others, but there's not a single right way.
Is there a single wrong way?
There's no way. There is nothing simple about how you educate kids, and there's no recipe for success. And I think also you have to see that there's almost no country in the world that doesn't somehow project its anxieties about itself onto how it educates its kids. So if we were to go to Shanghai, we would find people worrying about stress, overwork, kids at school for 12 hours a day, extra evening classes, weekends, no music, and we'd find people coming to the UK to say, so how do you do it in the UK? How do you get a bit more laid back? So I think the real key is just to say education is a very inexact science, and no single table, as we know from league tables, will actually give you the right answer to what's going to work.
So it should be Nick Ferrari.
Well, I'm greatly disheartened by someone as well-educated as you taking that stance. I would suggest there's a very simple reason that schools in Asia are overtaking and outstripping ours here in Britain. And it comes down to one word, and that word is competition. On the radio show, thank you, on the radio show that I present on LBC, we phoned 3 countries and asked about their schools. We phoned Malaysia, Singapore and Hong Kong. And in every single one of those countries, when a child enters a class, they know where they are in that class, whether they're 19th or whether they're 25th. The teachers work around and they try and bring them up. It is called competition. Guess what? As and when you go into the real world, and I look around, some of you are very, very young when you go to your first jobs, that is called competition. That was outlawed in this country by mostly Labour, not solely, by mostly Labour, left-wing, trendy educationists who said we could never compete for anything, no child could ever win a prize, don't worry if they can't spell, don't worry if they don't have any grammar, as long as they got it down on a piece of paper and they got the sentiment out, it was all right. What a load of cobblers, and we're reaping the price.
Okay. Danny Alexander. Number of people, keep your hands up and I'll come to you in a moment. Danny Alexander.
Well, I think I'm a parent. I'm a parent of 2 young children. I find these tables worrying, actually. I mean, you know, and particularly in the areas of maths and science, where we know that if, as a country, we want to succeed in the modern world, that educating people properly in maths and science, as well as the important arts subjects, but particularly those ones, You know, the author of these statistics, the academic at the OECD, says maths is the best protection against unemployment. And if you think about the industries where we're going to succeed as a country in the future, we need to improve our performance in these areas. And that's why I think it's so important that we make sure that we get rid of some of the disadvantages in our education system. For example, kids from disadvantaged backgrounds have for a long time done worse in our schools. That's why we're introducing a pupil premium. We've introduced a pupil premium to put more money in schools. It's like an idea that Nick Clegg has championed. That's why today I'm very proud that we've announced that we're going to fund free school meals for every child in the first.
I'm sorry.
You had your say. Let me
finish.
Cost
an extra £150 million, which you hadn't budgeted, and you just say, "Oh, we'll find a shortfall." Where do you think you get the £150 million from? You tax all of us, and you just turn around and say we just need another £150 million.
Let me just finish the point. We absolutely right. The money comes from the taxes of people in this room and from money that the government has raised in many different ways. The point is that actually when kids have got a full stomach at school, they learn better. All the studies have been done show that actually with free school meals you get kids having a 20% advantage in terms of their educational achievement in those vital early years at school. And the truth is, as a country, we let our kids down in those first years of education and they never catch up again. That's why focusing on that age group, I think, is so important.
All right, let's get from the person there. I'll come to you in a moment. Yes, the woman there on the back.
I think as well as mentioning South Korea, we've got to mention the fact that the kids in South Korea have got a much higher rate of suicide than in the UK or anywhere else. Yes, suicide rate for young children.
Exactly.
So this is as well something to mention.
So that you think that they're overpressed. What do you think, sir, in the front here?
I think that education is clearly key to a competitive global economy, and I worry that this is the tip of the iceberg, these league tables, that'll trickle down into our university system. You know, I've been to a place like Cambridge, and competition is key. Your rankings, every exam result, and it is very stressful, but everyone wants to come to these institutions and wants to come to the UK. I don't want to lose that external investment.
Rachel Reeves.
Look, I don't want my children to go to school in South Korea. I want my children to go to school in this country. But the results from the PISA League tables are a wake-up call to us. We do need to do better if we want to compete for jobs in the future. And the gentleman there says education is key to a successful economy. It's also key to successful people who live in that economy. And we are going to have to compete more in the future. But look, I went to my local state school in southeast London, and I got a fantastic education there, but it was also at a time when there were huge cuts to education budgets, and my sixth form was 2 prefab huts in the playground. There are never enough textbooks to go round, and that did hold people back. Now, we have seen huge transformation of schools in this country over the last 15 years, but we need to do better still, and we need to redouble our efforts, and I think the PISA results show that we have to do that. And that
why are we 25th in maths? 23rd in reading, 21st in science. Why are we so low?
We have improved in all these areas, but other countries are leapfrogging and doing even better than us. So we do need to redouble our efforts. Now, that means having the best people teaching in our schools, and things like Teach First that got young people from the best universities into the classroom has made a big difference. But we're still really struggling to recruit enough good teachers in maths and science. And if we want to have kids who succeed in the future, we need to get the best people into some of those hardest schools, like we've done in Hackney and other areas in London, because that's going to be what makes a difference to young people in their lives.
Okay.
And, you know, it's fine for Mary to say that, you know, you've got to have creativity and all of those things, but also young people have got to leave school with those decent GCSEs if they're going to be able to get
jobs. All right, Mary, answer
There's
this.
absolutely no question, but to come back to PISA, what I wonder is how many people have looked at the kind of questions that are in these tests. You actually looked at the exam papers?
What does it matter? What does it matter? Because Britain comes 25th.
Well,
what does it matter?
Let me give you one example. Okay. Not chosen at random, it's from the reading test. And it's a test which shows you a receipt from a camera shop. At the bottom of the receipt, it says, "Thank you for your custom." The question is, why do you think the shop put "thank you for your custom" at the bottom of the receipt? The correct answer, for which you get full marks, is in order to build up a relationship with the customer. If you were to put "in order to show that the customer is valued," they would get no marks. Now, when you look through these questions, sometimes multiple choice, sometimes not, with the marking scheme, it's all available on the web, and you say these are the kind of questions that governments are using as accurate tests of how our kids are doing, I think that's crazy.
All right.
And it's not a wake and
David Davis.
Well, I couldn't disagree with Mary more for a number of reasons. Firstly, of course, all these tests are rough and ready, and they're none of them perfect. But PISA and TIMSS and other surveys all show much the same thing. And one thing that they show over and over again is that the people who come top in these, the countries that come top in these tests, tend to be South Korea, Singapore, the various provinces of China. In other words, the people who are showing us a clean pair of heels in terms of the global economic competition. They're winning, and they're winning because their people are well educated. And in this country, and it exposes something which actually Boris referred to, although he got rather pilloried for it last week, and that is in this country.
Boris
Johnson.
Boris Johnson.
I'm
right?
in London, so I assumed everybody knew who I was talking about.
Yeah, but you're talking to the whole country. And
not
then
everyone's watching in London.
No. In Yorkshire, I'd have explained more, yes.
All right. Anyway, Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, said what?
But he sort of highlighted a point, which is that we have basically three classes of schools in this country. We have standard state schools, we have state grammar schools, and we have private schools. The private schools are as good as any in the world. The grammar schools mostly as good as any in the world. Some of the comprehensives are, but most of our state sector doesn't compete well enough. Well, this is what all these things are telling you. And it's letting down an entire generation.
Well,
and it's been doing so for some time.
If you're selecting who goes to your school, of course you're going to get better results. If you're selecting on academic ability and parental income, it is easier to get good results. I think our state schools should be applauded for doing what they're doing with kids from all types of backgrounds, rather than saying that the private schools are so
all right. Well, the woman there, I'll come to you, Daniel. The woman there.
Do you not think that schools are focusing too much on getting the correct statistics rather than focusing on the pupils themselves?
Danny Alexander, you want to answer that point?
That's not my experience. I think that schools should focus on the performance of their pupils and on the well-being of their pupils too. But actually, I totally agree with what Rachel said. I went to my local comprehensive school in the Highlands of Scotland. I had a good education there. I think this argument that you should have an elitist education system, whether it's stratified by private schools or by grammar schools or whatever, is the wrong argument. Actually, if you go to countries like South Korea, you find that they've been able to develop a system that offers excellence in education for every child in that society. And the idea that we have to say, well, unfortunately, so many other schools aren't good enough, and therefore just going to have a few that are good, I think is a recipe for absolute disaster.
Now, Danny, nobody's arguing in favour of that. I'm saying that's one of the problems in our system. We have the most stratified country in the world virtually today. You look at the way our country runs. People starting from a working-class background have a very low chance of getting on in Britain today.
But that's
because of the education system.
And why the grammar schools are one of the greatest tools for social enabling this country has ever known. And the Conservative Party currently, it would be absolutely anathema to go back to them. And it is a fantastic opportunity for kids, regardless of how much money mum and dad have got in the bank, to have a great education. Right. They should be brought back tomorrow.
The woman in the fourth row there. That's you.
I would definitely say that I think the system is going through some issues as a result of mollycoddling for too many years.
Mollycoddling?
Yes.
Of the children?
Yes. When I went to school, we were placed on a ladder. You knew exactly where you were on the ladder. And when you went home at the end of the term and you told your parent that you were lost, you felt a level of shame. I don't believe it's right that children can graduate at 16, 17 years old without basic maths. And we think that, this is a system that we can adopt in today's day and age. It's completely wrong. And I think that the earlier that we start to address these issues from a very young age, the better it will be.
By making schools more competitive, in effect.
Definitely.
Yes. And the man at the back there. Yes, you, sir. Yeah, you.
Discipline and structure, which is quite apparent in South Korea, isn't prevalent in our state schools here. With discipline and structure comes success.
All right. And you, sir, in the second row, yes.
My mum's from Malaysia, and I've got cousins in Malaysia as well. And the kind of difference between them being taught in school and I was taught here is that also there's a culture within the families that kind of pushes them along. And I mean, I went to independent school, so most of my mates were pushed by their parents because they were successful. But I see sometimes that some parents, I'm not saying all parents, but minority parents there's no sort of culture at home to kind of push them along as well. I don't know where it's something that could be sort of worked upon as well, because I think sometimes the tables don't really show everything as well.
Are you saying that in Malaysia it's normal for children to be pushed much more than in this country?
Yeah, they have outside tutoring. Like all my cousins and nearly everyone in their class will, once they finish school, they'll go to another
Same thing
hour
happens
for tutoring.
here, doesn't it? I think. Yes, you, sir, here.
Yeah. Why did both the Conservatives and the Labour Party, when they're in government, allow such grade inflation on GCSEs year after year, pretending that the population was getting more intelligent when it must be a lie when you've seen the things on the BBC? Why did you allow that? Because I was very fortunate to get through on O-levels just before GCSEs came behind. And I saw it degrade the A-levels, I saw it degrade the universities. Universities had to have an extra year. They lost a whole year. Now, why did the politicians allow that to happen? Just for your cheap political tricks. That's the future of the country you're talking about.
Right.
The
Rachel
generation
Reeves,
ahead.
do you want to answer this?
Look, I think the big challenge we've got in our education system today is not too many kids getting good results, but too many kids who aren't getting those decent GCSE results. And so I think we should, we should be concentrating
sorry, you're not answering his point. His point was they're not getting good results.
You make it sound like every kid is leaving school with straight A's, and the reality is we've still got 40% of kids who aren't leaving school with those decent
but
GCSEs.
year after year it went up.
Well,
Yes, and they're not more intelligent.
He's right.
But there's better teaching. There's better teaching. There's better teaching in schools. There's been huge investment.
Why do they do the exams of years past and they have the same rate as before?
Because
you've just got higher grades.
Well, partly because different things matter.
And so the future of the children matter. I don't take my children to school in the UK because of that.
Sir, you asked the question and I'm trying to give an answer. And if you today went and look at a GCSE paper in physics, in science, or in English literature for A-level or further maths, I bet you would struggle with a lot of those questions. I don't think they are simple questions, and I don't think we should devalue the achievements of our young people today, whether it's at GCSEs, whether it's GMVQs, A-levels, or their university degrees. Kids are working incredibly hard. We've put huge investment into schools and into teacher training, and those things do lead to better results, and we should applaud that.
I did mechanical engineering, and the exams were tough. You had to remember the formulas before you actually had to go into the exam.
Well, maybe
they're not given on a plate, they're given multiple choice. It's just dumbed down.
Hang on,
and
these
it's
kids
not
can only take the
responsible.
exams that are put in front of them. Let's be fair. These children can only take the exams that are put in front of them, so we must applaud what they do. But you have to address the fact that, particularly under your government, every single year, supposedly, the population got brighter, and it's simply not true. It doesn't happen anything else. Look at Manchester United. They're sinking like a stone. It doesn't always get better. That's the reality.
The woman there on the right. I'll take 2 or 3 more points, then we must go on. The woman in the stripe.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Mary and back up a point that a woman made in the audience over there. South Korea has one of the highest suicide rates within high school students, and you cannot just simply look at another nation with rose-tinted glasses based on facts and figures and statistics. Having taught English in South Korea for 4 years, I can actually tell you it was really distressing to see the amount of competition that students were taught to, to utilize in everyday life, the stress that they were put under. There was students who were 10 years old would come back home at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, being in private tuition up until then. It was really unhealthy and really quite distressing to witness. So we can't just look at another nation with rose-tinted glasses. We've got to look at
But were you expected to put them under pressure too, as an English teacher?
Well, I taught in a state school, so there wasn't that much pressure on me, and most of the emphasis on their education is actually, well, it's normal for a South Korean child to go to a private institution and go and get after-school lessons up until about 11 o'clock at night, and this is this starts at about 8 years old. I mean, it's really quite serious.
And it puts into perspective, I think, this kind of notion of that competition is necessarily good, because I absolutely take your point that there'd be some kids who would go back home at the end of term shamed by their position at the bottom of the ladder and determined to do better. But we also know there were other kids who came back home devastated by their position at the bottom of the ladder and never could ever get back into that subject again. And it doesn't always work the same way.
Danny, yes.
I was just going to say,
yes.
the lady in the fourth row there, I think, made a very important point, because too often we just allow and tolerate these gaps in attainment to emerge at a very young age. I think your point about investing in kids when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, that's the most important time, because once that gap emerges, the history of our education system shows it never gets put back together again. I think investing in kids at a young age with a high-quality education is the best way to make sure that every child has the best start in life, and that's the way to get a fairer society.
You agree with him?
I do agree with Danny, but what I would say is that although, you know, childhood suicide is obviously wrong, we have some lessons to learn. Yes. I mean, you can't have a situation where we say, you know, we don't want to put you under stress, we don't want you to compete. In the real world, you compete. I mean, I compete with 1,000 people for one job. I work till 11 o'clock at night. So the whole purpose of education is to prepare them for real life. Now, I'm sorry, I don't believe we can cover our children from what life is really going to be like.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'll take one more point from the lady here, and then we'll move on.
Well, there's quite a few points. One is...
Can you make one?
OK, then. The competition in very young children, I don't think is very healthy. It's OK for children to know their place in a class. I'm a primary teacher. And if children know their place in a class, it's great if they've got the academic ability to get near the top. But if they haven't, and they're constantly at the bottom or in the bottom 5 in a class, year after year, that is no way that's good for them. That is so demoralising.
So what do you do if they are in the bottom 5?
Well, you give them as much extra help as you can, but a lot of them don't have their parental support.
But are you against what she was saying about children knowing their place? I mean, she said
I am against it. It would be nicer if
they didn't. So you wouldn't tell them where they were?
I'd like to keep them closeted
so
for a little while.
So you wouldn't make one top
Life's painful enough when they're older, but when they're young, I just...
But her point is, life's painful enough, you've got to make it painful early on. That's...
No, not at all.
Let them learn.
It depends what result you want. If you want these people to become productive, interesting members of the community in whichever way they're going to contribute, making them feel failures at the age of 5 is not a great way to start.
All right, we must go on because that's very interesting. Sorry to those of you who want to get on it. Just a reminder, of course, that if you're watching this at home, you can join us. You can debate by text or Twitter. Our hashtag, as ever, is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. If you want to text us, 83981, and the red button will tell you what others are saying. A question from Lisa Laricha, please. Lisa Laricha.
Yes, I'm 31. Should I expect to work until I'm 70?
I'm 31. Should I expect... Well, we know that today the announcement was made you had to expect to work until you were 68 or 9 very soon. It'll probably be 70 and then 75, and goodness knows where we'll be. David Davis.
Well, the truth of the matter is we're all going to have to work longer than our previous generations did, but I think, and in that respect, the government's right. It can't defy mathematics. We haven't got the money to pay for the length of retirement people would have had if we stayed at 65 or 60 in the case of ladies, women. The problem, however, I think in the policy we've got is that whereas everybody around this table, I would think, have no trouble working until they're 70, they live in relatively easy conditions and do a job which is not particularly manual. If I dug trenches for a living, or I was a nurse and lifted patients a lot, had a lot of physical activity, I think that's different. And I think we really have to think, as we extend the ages higher up, what sort of occupation do people have, what sort of health do they have, and address that. And we've got 20 years to do it. It's not something we have to think about very quickly. I think we should actually address the issue of not everybody retiring at the same age. People have very, very tough jobs, very, very hard physical jobs, should actually have a better crack at having a decent retirement than they currently do.
Rachel Reeves.
Well, a couple of years ago, the government tried to increase the state pension age for women in their mid-50s with just 6 years' notice, and I thought that was totally wrong because people need time to prepare for the future, and I think you need years' notice so that you can save more, so you can train, so you know how long you're going to be expected to be in the workforce. But I do think it's right, as people live longer, and we should massively celebrate that. It's a huge achievement, partly down to our National Health Service, that people are living longer and healthier lives. And so it's right that people work longer, because if they don't, they'll have a poorer retirement, because the money that you can save during working life won't be enough to support you during those years of retirement. But, you know, David is right that we need to change quite a few things if this is going to be a reality. you know, it's fine for us in the House of Commons to say to construction workers and shop workers, you've got to work until you're 70. But if we're going to ensure that that's fair and people can work in dignity until they're 68 or 70, we need to change the world of work as well. We need to ensure that we offer that training to people in their 50s so they can get the jobs that are available. We need to work with employers to do more to value the experience that older workers have to offer, but also change those jobs. So sometimes they're not frontline workers. If you're a construction worker, you might not want to be up scaffolding when you're 70, but they can still make a huge contribution in their career.
Lisa, are you alarmed at the prospect of working till you're 70 or more?
I think it's not just the physically demanding jobs, but I'm a social worker, so I think as well jobs that, you know, also involve quite a lot of emotional stress. You do need to sort of be well equipped and to think about always delivering quality. You go in to do meaningful work, so, you know, if it's becoming quite a slog.
So you'd want to be excluded from the provision you retired at 70, like David Davis was suggesting?
Yes. I think some professions it should be looked at, the nature of the work, as you were saying.
Taking lessons from politicians about pensions is like being lectured about sobriety by the Reverend Flowers. These are the most cosseted bunch of people you will ever come across. The sort of pensions that these people will enjoy, and by the way, not like you guys out there, you'll be slaving until you're about 110. If you're lucky, you'll get your first house when you're about 90, when you've saved up the deposit. These blokes do this job. They then retire on the sort of pension that you and I would need north of £2 million in a pension pot to generate. Unless you happen to be Wayne Rooney or a hopeless BBC boss who's been slung out on his ear and been given a payment, you're never going to have the money.
Okay. Man at the back there, the blue shirt on. Yes, Susan.
Okay, you guys, I'm a 16-year-old, and you guys have just spent the past, like, 10 minutes accusing me of being a retard. But I'm personally finding it really hard to accept that you guys are making me work until I'm 70, when, A, I'm not promised a job when I leave uni, and B, I won't, as Nick said, I won't be able to get a house. No. I won't... What do I retire on? On the magical couch that my parents are going to leave me in their inheritance?
And you'll be stacking shelves in B&Q when you're 82, my friend, and I'll come and see you. Absolutely right.
Danny Alexander, Nick Ferrari says you're going to retire in the equivalent of £2 million pension, you've got it cushy, and you're making life hell for everybody else.
Well, I'd say if Nick Ferrari is visiting this 16-year-old when he's stacking shelves at the age of 82, he'll really want to a ripe old age.
I still want to pass my 11 plus.
Well, maybe not. But, I mean, the answer to the question, both that gentleman's question and to Lisa's original question, is yes. You know, you will have to work probably until you're 69 in your case, at your age, maybe 70 at your age. And this is a consequence of some simple facts that I think politicians have ignored for a very long period of time, which is as healthcare improves, as our societies improve, life expectancy is rising. People are living longer, healthier lives on average across our country and across the developed world. And the simple fact is, unless we set some rules now about what proportion of your working life you'd expect to spend in retirement and how long you have to work for, then we simply won't be able to pay out the basic state pensions that everyone in this room would expect, much less to build up the entitlements in workplace pensions or other pensions that we can all afford.
What do you say to the idea of a two-tier retirement that David Davis suggested, that manual workers, people doing hard work, or indeed social workers can get an exception from this? You didn't include social workers. She included social workers, because she is one, but that's of her
I think, in a
choice.
sense, in the argument there, you hear part of it, which is that every profession would say that they have a particular special case.
No, but would you make a special case of people who physical labour?
I spent quite a lot of time negotiating through some really tough changes to public service pensions 2 years ago, including for MPs, changing the terms of pensions for an awful lot of public sector workers. It was quite unpopular with a lot of those groups because we had to put those pensions back on a footing that was affordable to the taxpayer and where those people made a reasonable contribution. Every group says that they need to have particular exceptions. The truth is every pension scheme has early retirement provisions within it, and it's really the responsibility of the healthcare system and of other parts of our society to make sure that people can live longer, healthier lives. You can't expect the pension system, where in this country, I think rightly since Lloyd George, a Liberal, first introduced the state pension back in the early part of the 20th century, we've had a common retirement age for everybody, and I don't think the pension system can take care of the problems in our health system.
Danny, we're not talking about special pleading. There are objective differences between the effect on your health of digging a trench when you're 70 or being Chief Secretary when you're 70. I think the wear and tear on you is somewhat different.
Well, when I've been a 70-year-old nurse has got to lift me out of bed, I mean, that is going to be a hell of a challenge for anybody, isn't it?
For any nurse. Even a 20-year-old nurse.
Maybe 7 nurses could lift me out of bed.
It might take any 2 of us on the panel to do that particular job, Nick.
Well, I know I'm picking.
But look, people also change jobs as they move through their lives. That's also part of it. You know, actually, one of the things that employers in this country need to get their heads around better is that older workers can make a huge contribution in our society.
You're dodging one question. Somebody is digging trenches or building houses, carrying hods of bricks, doing really physical work. Are you saying that the same rule would have to apply to them? As far as government is concerned, in your view, if you're still in coalition government by the time these people are 70, that it would have to apply?
I'm saying that there should be a single state pension age for everybody, yes.
Right, OK, I just wanted to get that clear. The woman there at the back, yes.
Hi there. I'm actually a nurse, and I would find it very difficult to lift this young man up over here, and I'm in my 30s. So I think that there's a point here to be made that you can't put everybody under the same bracket. I would agree with the social worker down here. Not only are they actually physically straining jobs, but they are actually mentally straining as well. And sometimes you can go home absolutely exhausted by what you've had to deal with that day. And I just think that you need to look at manual workers, nurses, professionals slightly differently.
What's your reaction to the thought that you'd be working still at 69?
I just don't think that you're going to be able to provide quality care at that age. At the age of 69, I mean, I work in a medical admissions unit, which is sort of linked to an accident and emergency, so we take medical admissions in that are coming through A&E. I wouldn't be able to do that job at 68.
What's your retirement age now meant to be?
So I would get my NHS pension at 60.
Right.
I'm in
Under the reform terms, she'd get it at 65, and it would rise with the state pension age, by the way.
Mary Beard.
What I liked about Danny's contribution was that he was absolutely straight that this is about cash, this is about saving money.
Well, it's about making things affordable to the country.
OK, I was giving you a compliment, don't
Thank you.
And
I'm not used to that.
I am not going to resist telling you that this has a history going back 2,000 years, and that exactly 2,000 years ago today, the Emperor Augustus could not afford to pay the pensions of the soldiers. So he postponed their retirement date. And what do you think the consequence was?
My knowledge of classical history is not good enough to answer that question.
A vast mutiny. So, you know, there are lessons to be learned here. But I think in general, I mean, the points that David and Rachel have been making are obviously right. This has to go along, whatever its, you know, basic financial driver, has to go along with rethinking some of the nature of work, of what a working career looks like. How can, you know if you've been spending your life as a fireman, you know, at what point do we think you want to stop? And we also have to remember, all of you, you're using the slogan "longer and healthier lives," which is almost as bad as hard-working families, because there's some people out there who actually are not going to have longer and healthier lives, and they're certainly not going to have healthier lives. And there is a way that this is building in in a sense, a subclass of those of us who are not, you know, happily going to go on to we're 85 and then drop down dead suddenly on the bus.
Okay. That all this came out, of course, today from the autumn statement. So let's just move on a little bit wider to the autumn statement. Take a question from Grace Hunt. Grace Hunt, please.
Does the Chancellor's autumn statement show the economy is in full recovery?
The full is the key word. Does it show that the economy is in full recovery? Danny Alexander, is it in full recovery?
Well, the coalition government's autumn statement shows that the recovery is underway. I would not yet say that it is a full recovery. I think there's a lot more work to be done to make sure that the recovery that is starting to show positive signs for this country gathers pace. But it's also worth saying that our growth figures have improved in the last few quarters. Our borrowing is coming down. The time at which our debt starts to fall is getting nearer. 1.4 million net jobs have been created in the private sector in the past 3 years. That is a huge testament to the hard work of individuals and businesses who are powering the recovery in this country. So, look, there is progress being made. I'd say it's progress that's being made because the government's economic plan is working, because we've been willing to take the difficult decisions that need to be made to get this country back on the right track, to make sure we can pay our way, to invest in some of the things we've been talking about over the last few questions that help to raise our productivity in future. And let's not forget, this is the coalition government came together, Liberal Democrats, my party, and Conservatives, David's party, to clear up a massive economic mess that had been made by the previous government. We're on the way to doing that, but the job is not yet finished, and there's a lot more work to do.
Rachel Reeves.
Look, of course it's welcome that the economy is finally growing after 3 years of flatlining. But for many people, people in this room, people watching on television, things are incredibly tough at the moment. Yes. And in 40 of the 41 months that David Cameron has been Prime Minister, prices have risen at a faster rate than wages. And whether it's your gas and electricity bills, the rent, food prices, the prices of everything are going up, and yet wages are standing still. And that's making it very difficult for people to make ends meet.
Could you have squared that circle yourself?
Well, we've said, for example, that we'd freeze energy prices, that we would reintroduce the bank bonus tax to guarantee a job for every young person who's been out of work for more than a year, introduce a tax on properties worth more than £2 million to introduce a 10p starting rate of tax. We wouldn't be able to do everything we would like to do because, of course, the fiscal situation we're in is still an incredibly difficult one. But we would be making different choices, and we would be prioritising those people on low and modest incomes rather than giving a tax cut for people earning more than £150,000. But if you look at the moment, at the very bottom, you've got people who this Christmas are going to have to go to food banks and who are going to loan sharks to be able to make ends meet. But you've also got families, people in the middle, who are also incredibly worried about paying for the energy bills, what to do if the boiler breaks down or you need a new washing machine. Not to mention the worries that people have, and people have alluded to this already, about their children and their grandchildren and what life has in store for them in terms of saving for a pension, buying a house, paying off the university debt. But, there are choices to be made. The government made some choices today. Labour will be making very different ones in government.
Man in spectacles.
Firstly, Rachel, you said the economy for the last 3 years is flatlining. Well, it's not flatlining because that would mean zero growth. And secondly, what is the current government doing? You say in the autumn statement by 2015 you want to reduce unemployment to 7%. What is being done with youth unemployment, which currently stands at 21%?
Youth unemployment is a particular point. Nick Ferrari, I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Nick Ferrari.
Yes, there's some ifs. If you are in work at the moment, and possibly if you live in the south, because I fear we're probably more a divided nation now than we have been for quite some time, then yes, you probably are doing okay. But certainly while the economy improves, you don't necessarily feel that because you're not getting more in your pay packet or in your wallet. But what absolutely chilled me to the bone was when Rachel said, when Labour are in government, we're going to do this and this and this. Because let's never forget that these were the people, Ed Balls, who went as pink as a lobster and had the voice of a clanger today when he was actually giving his return address. He was the man who brilliantly sold the gold at the worst possible time, when the price was at its lowest. He decided we should sell it, so we lost it. If that lot came in, we would all be queuing outside Wonga by Monday morning, so never let it happen. Yes, Rachel.
This lot just sold Royal Mail at half the price it was
I agree.
worth. So,
terrible. Terrible decision. I think that's going to be the part of a parliamentary inquiry. Whatever with Vince Cable, maybe he'd been round to see Nigella. Whatever happened with Vince Cable, he clearly got the price wrong.
OK. You sit in the front there.
We were all told when I first entered the city that the best thing to do was put our money into pensions, which I and my good lady Julie done. However, no one told us there was a chap called Brown who was going to tax the pensions and make the money that I'd saved in my pensions worth almost nothing.
Do you think the economy is recovering and is in full recovery?
I feel
back to the question.
It's definitely recovering. I can feel it. Certainly, it's better than it was.
David Davis.
Well, Ed Balls notwithstanding, we would have been careful about our rhetoric today. First off, when we supposedly had a double-dip recession, we didn't actually have a double-dip recession. The numbers were wrong. Now we are improving, but we don't want to get too manic about that either. I mean, we are, what, 1.5%, in round numbers, about 1.5% growth rate, hopefully 2.5% next year. It takes about 3% growth to actually spread the income around the country. I mean, most of the Western countries got this problem. The Americans, 2% growth rate, nearly all of the income comes into the top couple of percent of the population. So we are actually just at the beginning of this. That's why this austerity policy is going to have to go on for some time. That's why the Treasury and Danny and his colleagues are going to have to work incredibly hard to make this actually keep going. We started out talking about the education system. We are up against ferocious competition around the world, in China and Singapore and other places. We're going to have to earn our way. And so, yeah, we're beginning, but we're only just beginning to recover.
Would you like to see tax cuts at this stage yourself?
Well, yes, interestingly, one of the things that came out, the answer is yes, but let me tell you why. One of the things that came out today, let's pick up Rachel's point about supposedly the top 1% or whatever getting tax breaks. Actually, since the tax was reduced, the amount of our tax paid by the top 1% has gone from 27% to 30%, as high as it's ever been as a result of our tax.
This was the cut from 50 to 45%.
To 50 to 45, which we debated on your programme actually on the day when it was announced. So we're actually getting more money out of the rich, not less money out of the rich, which is what I want to see, because that's how we pay for our health service and our pensions and so on. And we also heard from the Chancellor, let me just finish the point, we also heard from the Chancellor today that you've done a dynamic study into the effect of corporation tax. And again, by having a low corporation tax, we're raising more money, more jobs, more inward investment. That's why it's hard work. The policies aren't popular, they are difficult, but they're actually the only way we're going to deliver a decent
Which taxes would you like to see cut now, right now? Would you like to have seen cut today?
Well, I approved of pretty much everything. It's unusual for me. I approved of everything they did today, but, which is a novelty.
Falling off his chair here.
I know he is.
My goodness.
Because you know, we kept the corporation tax low. We did a lot of things to help small businesses. Where the jobs come from in this country now are not businesses, big businesses. They're small businesses. So all the rate capping, all of the actions to improve the high street, all of that is incredibly worthwhile and will show its benefit in the next year.
The woman down the right.
I don't know how the Chancellor can claim that we're in full recovery today. We've got 1 in 5 children in London living in poverty. Those are the statistics, and 80,000 children living in temporary accommodation in the capital. I think we're a long way from full recovery.
Can I come back on that? The truth is, and it's something that Rachel said as well, that the recovery is underway, but it is not fully. The country is by no means fully recovered. And, you know, recovering from the deepest economic crisis that we've seen for very many decades, where the loss was average £3,000 a household during the economic crisis, of course it's the case that it takes time to repair people's living standards, but also the truth is that the only way sustainably to repair people's living standards is to have a strong economic recovery where productivity rises. And it's only because we've got a plan that is doing that we've been able, for example, to cut income tax for 26 million working people in this country, something my party, the Liberal Democrats, promised at the last election. From next May, every working person in this country will be keeping £700 more of their own money. We've cut fuel duty, we've frozen council tax, we've taken action on energy bills. We're doing a great deal to help people with cost of living pressures, rightly so, but we're only doing it because we've got a good plan that means we can afford to do it.
You sound as if you're back on the news bulletins.
Yes.
Well, sorry, but it is true.
Very good.
Well, rehearse the line.
I find the autumn statement slightly irritating.
Oh dear.
For all the reasons, not its contents, but the reason that we've partly seen tonight, you know, that it acts as a sort of penny in the slot for you to come out and swap percentages that most of us don't quite get, and we suspect you don't entirely get either. I said suspect. And also, we know what's in it already, because we've only had to read the newspapers for the previous 2 days. So why we get all excited about what he's going to say? Because it's been in The Guardian and everything else. So I read it. Thanks to you, Danny did lend me the autumn statement so I could prepare. And I thought, so what is this for, really? What is it for if it's not for what it looks as if it's for? And I read it really as an election message, actually. This is the beginning of the election manifesto. And what it's saying, you're absolutely right, and you've done it tonight. You're very careful to say, not yet full recovery, because actually, if we had a full recovery, we could go back and have a Labour government, and that would be hunky-dory. What we're saying...
I don't think this country could afford a Labour government under any circumstances.
What you're saying is, We're nearly there. There's a little bit of blue sky over there. We're on the right track, and what you can't possibly trust is going back to those guys. So it's very important for your election not to say we're fully recovered, but to say we're pointing in the right direction.
Mary,
it certainly doesn't feel like fully recovered to me, but...
As Nick is saying to my right, look at the figures, but also look at my part of the country. I come from the north of England, yeah? And you will not pretend that there's a full recovery in the north of England.
You won't pretend there's a full recovery even if you live in leafy Cambridge.
So, you know, Danny's absolutely right. We are beginning. 1.5% is just a beginning. We cannot afford to stay at this level. We have to get better.
All right, the man there, Neil O'Shea.
You're doing percentages again.
You, sir.
The economy is running at a huge deficit. We are up to our necks in debt. And living standards are going to have to fall. And I think no politician admits to that. We are not earning enough. Everything we buy this Christmas is coming from China or the Far East. If we don't make stuff, we don't actually generate wealth, we can't live at our current living standards. We've got to get used to a changing environment.
And there is a report that what growth there is because people are using their savings, not because of increased manufacturing, increased prosperity and increased productivity. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I think this Christmas, I think we'll find that people are being asked to increase their level of debt, their personal debt, in order to help the country's national debt.
All right, you sir on the left here.
I think it's a complete fallacy that there's even a recovery, never mind a full recovery. People are buying things that they don't need with money that they don't have, which they're then going into debt for. And when we do buy the things, we don't make them in this country. We buy them from Korea, or we buy them from China. And the whole point is that if we're really going to have a proper recovery, we need a growth policy. You don't have a growth policy.
Yes, we do.
And the Office of Budget Responsibility has made several predictions, all of which have transpired to be wrong. The government then used that data to make spending decisions which affect all of us. There is no recovery. We're all spending money which we don't have, which we're borrowing on goods that we don't make. We need to make things in this country rather than buy them from abroad.
And you said the second row.
I would just like to know how many of the MPs on the panel would voluntarily take a pay cut or a pay freeze to contribute towards a country that the majority of us work so hard for.
Well, I don't think I can catechize them on that, because I'm not... The man there, you, sir, the blue tie on.
There's been a lot of...
You're free to answer any of you that question about the pay cut.
Well, I can answer. When we came into government, all ministers took a 5% pay cut, and ministerial salaries have been frozen for the whole Parliament. All MPs' pay was frozen for 2 years, and is now the increases are restricted in exactly the same way as every other public sector worker. It's quite right that that should happen, because we all have to show and have restraint in pay to help the country recover the mess in its public finances.
Just a point from the person who's just about to start talking there.
Yeah, 1-point-something% is a tiny amount, but I'm very worried that people will actually think that we are on the road to recovery and vote for Labour. We do not need a situation where we continue to spend until we've actually started paying back our debt. We're in a bad situation. We just need to improve.
Okay. We've got 10 minutes still left. I'll try and get a couple more questions in. I'll take one, please, from John Golden. John Golden.
Does the extensive media coverage of Tom Daley's new relationship suggest that it's, in fact, still not okay to be gay?
It's an interesting question. The huge coverage of the diver Tom Daley saying he was in a gay relationship, the coverage of it, does that suggest it's still not okay? Nick Ferrari.
No, I don't think it does. I think you have to accept that this was an extraordinarily successful and much-loved young man. There may have been a few issues about his sexuality in the past. He was an Olympic hero. He's going to be front-page news. I would suggest the tone that was taken by all the newspapers, including the tabloids, radically different to how papers would have reported this 2 decades ago, a totally different tone. I would argue that it spoke to a much better and more tolerant Britain. It was totally embracing. Everybody said, all your luck, we couldn't care damn, just enjoy yourself and get on with your life. That's what I took from it.
Okay. Mary Beard?
Yeah, well, perhaps surprisingly, I absolutely agree with
We're not doing very well, Mary, but tell me why I'm wrong. Come on.
Absolutely agree, and I just thought... I thought my own reaction was that I wasn't terribly interested. It was actually,
well, don't read it,
was the point. I wasn't terribly interested.
There we go. Solved.
But I thought, and I think many people thought, fine, but just let the lad get back and dive, I thought, and not worry about his sex life. Just let him be a good
David
diver.
Davis.
He chose to tell us.
I guess the time when we're a really mature society will be when he doesn't even bother to tell us.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the real thing, because nobody then cares one way or the other. But in one respect, Nick is right. He's, you know, this is a sporting hero. You know, he's somebody who everybody idolises. The girls all idolise too. There'll be some sad girls, I suppose. But you know, fine. You know, he did it the way he did it. He did it very tastefully and very.
And he chose to do it.
Sensitive, and it was his choice.
Yeah,
Nobody forced it. His choice. Yeah. Wonderful.
Good luck to that.
Down to the back there.
If it was truly not an issue, then it wouldn't even have been mentioned. The fact that there is newspaper articles about an Olympic diver's sexuality shows that it's still, to some extent, an issue in someone's head. If it was just mentioned, even briefly in maybe an interview or something, then that would be more understandable. But why was it all necessary to make all of these big kerfuffle
Rachel
about it?
Reeves, you answer the point.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, no one would come out and say, you know, I've got something to tell you, I'm straight. So there is still, you know, an issue. And it is fantastic that Tom's done this. And the public reaction has been fantastic, as Nick has said. But if you take football, there isn't a single professional football in this country who is out as gay or bisexual. It may be that there's no professional footballers who are gay or bisexual, or it might be that they are afraid of telling us they are because they're worried about the reaction on the pitch when they're playing in matches. So I think there is still an issue. I think we've come a long way, as Nick has said, but there is still further to go until it is regarded as doesn't matter at all.
You, sir.
I'd address the gentleman up there. It only made news because it's Tom Daley. I remind the audience, this is Great Britain. An orientation or disability is treated far more liberally here than other parts of the world.
Danny Alexander. That's
true.
Well, I agree with that, I think, and it's right. Tom Daley's a famous guy. He's a celebrity and a successful athlete, and so there's bound to be a bit of attention when he says this. But I think it's a mark of our tolerance as a society that it's been received precisely in the way that it has been, as Nick has said. But I think Rachel does make an important point, which is that there are other sports where perhaps there's not as much tolerance as there needs to be. You know, there are very few footballers, cricketers, rugby players who've been able to make the sort of statement that Tom Daley has, and I think it's a good example in a sense that you can make these sorts of statements, be well received by the public, and I hope very much we will continue to become more tolerant as we have by supporting same-sex marriage in this country too.
Which you were against, I think. No, hold on. David Davis, you were against, weren't you?
Yeah.
Same-sex marriage. You still are against same-sex marriage?
Well, it's over, it's past, it's done. No, this is the important point here, because when we took through the civil partnership legislation, or at least the Labour Party did, and we supported it, we talked to Stonewall at that time and said, do you want same-sex marriage? And they said no. So, you know, I thought making a double issue out of it was a waste of time.
OK. I'm going to take one more question now, because we've got time for it, which was something, actually, that David Davis briefly mentioned. Tony Boto has the question.
Yeah. Do you agree with Boris that greed is good?
This was the speech, the Thatcher speech, the Margaret Thatcher lecture, that Boris Johnson made. Now, it goes back to the heart of the economy and, indeed, of education we've been talking about. This is the quote. "Some measure of inequality," he said, "is essential for the spirit of envy and keeping up with the Jones that is, like greed, a valuable spur to economic activity." True or false? Mary, what do you think?
I think neither true nor false. I think it's just another example of us being rather dim and handing Boris publicity on a plate. You know, Boris, he says something kind of arguably controversial, and he gets thousands of column inches. He then comes back and says, well, actually, if you read my speech, I didn't quite say that.
But he said exactly what I quoted.
But if you put it in context, it was rather different. And I read the speech in full, and he said that, and he said other things, which he then puts in the Scotsman or Scotland on Sunday and gets another 10,000 column inches. And in some ways, we all have a good time. He goes on your programme.
OK, can you address the issue? Is it true or false, what he said? That inequality, envy, keeping up with the Joneses and greed is a spur to economic activity, and a valuable spur.
Delete the valuable And in some cases, I have no doubt that greed is a spur to economic activity. I have no doubt. Whether it's a valuable spur, I will have much bigger cause to doubt. In fact, I think it's not valuable. But anybody who says that greed wasn't a spur to some forms of economic activity...
David Davis.
Boris used to work on my team when I was Shadow Home Secretary, which is why I've got so much grey hair.
You should see his.
He was an interesting handful. But Mary's got a point. But Mary's also a historian. You know, if she thought back, she'd think of Henry Ford, Edison, Vanderbilt, all the people who made the great Industrial Revolution. They weren't just doing it for fun. They were doing it because they wanted to make a fortune, and they did. So the point that Boris is making, and I'm going to come back to the other bit that you've not read out, David, the point he was making is this is a driver. It actually makes economies run. It makes companies go bigger. It makes people create wealth for everybody, not just for themselves. But what he also said, I think, I have to do it from memory, I don't have the thing in front of me, but he said something like, you know, I hope the Gordon Geckos of the city of tomorrow will give back and create more. And he made the point. Of course he recognised that there were a problem with unfettered greed doing things that aren't necessarily socially useful, to quote Adair Turner, I think. But he also made the point that it's necessary for people who are at the top of society to give a lot back. And that was really the point of the whole speech.
Nick Ferrari.
Boris clumsily put, which is ridiculous for a man of his level of education, although he didn't do very well in the IQ test, but there is nothing wrong with keeping up with the Joneses. And in fact, the audience has brilliantly brought it round in full circle, because it's almost as we talked about competition at the start. And the young lady in the fourth row back there and the young gentleman over there, you've expressed how important it is. That is why, as and when you have children, you want your children to do better than you. That is what it's all about. That is what drives it, and that is absolutely wholesome and correct.
Rachel.
Well, you know, you talked about what you want your children. You want your children to do better than you. They want them to be successful. You want them to be happy. But I don't want my children to be greedy. And I don't think greed is a virtue. I think it is a vice.
Take it in the whole, though. Take what he said in the whole.
Yeah, well, the question was from Tony, is greed good? I don't think greed is good, but wanting to do well, to create wealth and to create new things, of course that is. You know, and you mentioned people like Henry Ford, and if you look at some of the most successful business people, whether it be Gates or Ford or Rockefeller or Carnegie, they were incredibly successful in business, but they also gave a huge amount back as well. And that's because they weren't greedy, they were successful, but they also cared about the places where they worked.
30 seconds left, Danny Alexander.
I'd say that sometimes common sense is important too, as perhaps Boris has learned this time. I think that
you are an optimist.
Maybe I am. I am an optimist, as it happens. Yes, I am. But I think that what was so wrong about what Boris seemed to be saying was that there's a group of people in our population who should always be kept down, and some people are always going to succeed.
He didn't say
and I want a stronger economy in a fairer society where everyone has the chance to get on in life. You want to give everyone the opportunity. Of course, people are going to succeed to different levels according to their abilities and their education and their effort and their application. But you want a society where everyone has the chance to get on. That's what we should be and are working to achieve. And what's been perhaps a somewhat gloomy programme, I'd just say that as a country we have some brilliant institutions, some brilliant people, some brilliant businesses, and I really do believe that we can succeed in that way.
OK. I'm sorry, we've got to stop there. Our time's up. We're going to be in Swansea next week. We have Eric Pickles for the Tories and the First Minister for Wales, Carwyn Jones, for Labour. We're off the air while Parliament takes a break over Christmas. We'll be back in the new year in Lewisham, in south-east London, on the 9th of January, not far from here. To take part in either of those programmes, Swansea or Lewisham, go to our website or call 0330 123 9988. If you're listening on BBC Radio 5 Live, the debate, of course, goes on Question Time, Extra Time. In the meantime, my thanks to our panel here, to all of you who came here from the Octagon at Queen Mary, University of London. Good night.